My mouse is like so incredibly broken, you guys don't even know. Hello everybody, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about a lot of the new information ArenaNet released in their live stream, the Ready Up live stream they did last night. If you guys don't know, this was episode 3, I believe. Their ArenaNet now regularly do, in addition to the other live streams they do something called Ready Up, which is generally around PvP, I would say, to do with the game. But also it held a lot of information this week about balance changes that are going to be going across all formats of the game, of course, not just PvP related stuff, but World vs World, PvE as well, the big balance change thing. They had the whole balance team on there and they explained what they were doing. In addition to changes to the professions themselves that's coming out with the next update, they're actually going to do a huge overhaul to both the runes in the game and the sigils in the game. And on top of this, they're also adding an entirely new stat to the game to address, to begin to address the Zerker meta for Guild Wars 2 and how critical damage works. So I watched it, I was typing away. I love like watching their live streams and stuff and typing away. I feel like a real industry kind of guy. So I've got all these notes here. If you guys want just the specific stuff that I felt was really important, hang along and I'll give you guys some insights into what I think it means, since I've been PvPing quite a lot lately as well. But there'll be information about obviously the other formats too. So let's get into it. They opened up by talking about crit damage, so I guess I will do too. Basically, the idea is currently in Guild Wars 2, you can get gear that has flat crit damage on it. And the amount of crit damage a specific piece of your gear gives you varies greatly depending on what it is. So for example, a back piece doesn't give you many stats. It gives you barely any crit damage, while your amulet gives you a ridiculous amount of crit damage. So there's been a lot of inconsistencies in the way that you build crit damage in Guild Wars 2. A lot of actually interesting ways to build your character, I feel. You know, if you really want to max out on DPS, it wasn't a matter of going, you know, necessarily 100% full Zerkers, but you could have just specific pieces that gave you a lot of crit damage B on Zerk stats, and then you could have other items in your gear setup that had nothing to do with crit damage, and you could sort of min-max like this. But it was inconsistent and they didn't necessarily like it. So what they're doing is adding a new stat to the game called Ferocity. Now, if you think about the way critical chance works in this game, you have a stat of your crit chance, but your crit chance is determined by precision, okay? So you might get plus 100 precision from some area of your gear. You might put 10 points into a trait line, for example, and you'll get 100 precision, and that 100 precision then translates into a percentage. So that's exactly what they now intend to do for crit damage too. Instead of you just automatically getting crit damage, you now get ferocity, which is a number just like precision, which then translates into crit damage later. Does that make sense? Largely the reason why they're doing this is they want to bring the way that crit damage is built into gear into line with everything else in the game, and it removes those discrepancies now where some specific pieces are better if you go for crit damage rather than something else. Now, that change alone doesn't necessarily mean that crit damage has to be nerfed. Like, there's a risk that maybe it could be nerfed, or certain stat sets could be nerfed. Like, for example, Celestial gear. There's a lot of people who are saying, oh no, Celestial, they just added Ascended Armor, and now it looks like Celestial is going to be weaker than ever. Why have they just made me waste all this money? I spent all this money going up to Ascended so that it was better, and now it's just being nerfed back down to exotic level. I think some people have got a point there, but do bear in mind that specifics haven't been given on certain sets like that. However, the fact that they've added Ferocity didn't necessarily mean that crit damage had to be nerfed, but they are nerfing it. They're reducing the general effectiveness overall of all crit damage by about 10%, okay? So we're going over to this new Ferocity system, and if you are entirely Zerk-based, for example, if you're entirely Valkyrie-based, your crit damage number will probably, after the change, be 10% lower. 10% isn't a huge difference, but it's the first thing they want to do to pave the way to reduce the overall effectiveness of crit damage down a notch, so that perhaps with future updates as well, they can start to encourage more interesting things in the way that the PvE meta works. There are a lot of people who are expecting from this live stream that this was the be-all and end-all answer to the way that the crit damage meta would run, and now they're like screaming, oh, it's not fixed, I'm so annoyed. Well, in truth, it's a very big, complicated game, and they want to like get this first change out the door before then they push a bunch of other stuff. They need to like monitor exactly how the crit damage slight nerf, which really is only a slight nerf, works, and then they'll make the other changes later. I swear, I have a bit of an aneurysm. I was reading the Reddit thread earlier on the changes, and it was the most frustrating, annoying thing I've ever read. Like, there are so many people complaining about the most tiny little nerfs and acting like their class is at the bottom of the totem pole, or bitching about stupid tiny things that clearly have no idea how the bigger picture of the game is working at the moment. But we'll go over that for a second. So that's the big change to crit damage at the moment. I'm actually a little bit disappointed perhaps that it's not more than 10% that's been dropped down. But one thing that should be very clear to everyone is the way that crit damage works and its potency in PvP, which has always been different to PvE, is actually going to be unchanged. So, for example, in PvE, currently, you can get up to like 120% higher crit damage. In PvP, however, like getting to just 65% was like ridiculously high. It was much less effective, and they're actually not nerfing it in PvP too. I, at the moment, am very distasteful of the current PvP meta, where it's a lot of condition damage, a lot of stupidly tanky DPS stuff that's just kind of really boring. There's not that many big clutch moments, and it takes a while for people to get into the down state. I liked a lot more the Glacier meta we used to have, and I was suddenly very worried while watching this live stream, thinking to myself, oh god, they're nerfing crit damage. That means that the idea of a glassy power meta is even further away now. There's even less reason to run that kind of stuff because it's even less effective. But that's not true. PvP crit damage is remaining exactly the same as it always was. They wanted to make another few things clear, which I kind of want to repeat to you guys too, because I think some people have trouble listening. If you did go to the effort of buying yourself a bunch of Berserker's Ascended gear, you still have, even after the update goes live, you will still have the absolute highest maximum raw DPS gear set in the game. They haven't taken that away from you. They've not added Ferocity in and then also said, oh hey, and now we've got all this other stuff that's better than Zerx. Zerx is still at the top. Celestial is still very near to the top. Celestial is probably the main thing that people are worried about, because if they do it through the Ferocity system, it could actually be much lower crit damage. But in general, there isn't actually any reason really to be upset about your Ascended gear going down, because you're still at the very top. You're still going to be in the quickest times compared to everyone else, and you're still going to be that much more effective, say, in World vs. World. So don't worry too much. However, on that note, one advantage they have said of now that they've gone to Ferocity, there's one type of gear that they've never done before, and that's crit damage as a major stat. Crit damage has always been a minor stat. If you bought Valkyrie's gear, power was the major stat, then it had minor stat vitality and minor stat crit damage. Celestial has got crit damage as a minor stat. It's always been minor. But now that it's actually on the Ferocity system, just like Precision, they can do Ferocity major stat sets sometime in the future. So maybe sometime way down the line, when they eventually add some new gear sets and Ferocity is the major, then maybe we can complain and say, oh, so you made me get this Ascended gear, well, I've got all this armor, blah blah blah, and now there's better stuff out there. But that's not something they're doing for now, and if that change ever does go through, then you just have to value the money you spent on that Ascended gear for the time between now and then, if that makes sense. So anyway, they're also going to be giving out a blog post on this specific topic at some point in the future, and there will be more to address the Zerker meta in PvE, hopefully very soon in the patches that follow. I think they all accept 100% this won't change that much, if anything, but it's the first thing that they need to do. They need to monitor the change, and they don't like the Zerker meta necessarily either. Like, they even pointed out one really well-known example of this game, the way that rallying works in this game. Why would you want to support someone? Why would you have to play a support character when just by killing enemies to rally your friends, you're basically being a supportive character anyway? Do you know what I mean? Like, they even pointed that out. They understand this, and it's just going to have to be steps at a time, and this is the first key one that they have to put down. So, that's the first big change to crit damage. For PvP, no big change there at all. It's just going to Ferocity. Skills like Banner of Discipline, the Lightning Hammer, I guess a few traits that exist, are all going to be moved onto the Ferocity system, but their potency will all be the same. And in PvE, it's going to be culled by about 10% effectiveness, which really shouldn't be that bad. Moving on, as I said at the start of the video, they're also making big changes to runes and sigils. Let's start with sigils. Sigils is one of the most exciting things. I'm really pumped about this, okay? The first thing I mentioned was that currently in the game, if you are a character wielding a two-handed weapon, you only get one sigil. If you've got a main hand and an offhand, you get two sigils, and sigils tend to be quite important for people's builds. That they didn't necessarily agree with. If you look at classes like the Engineer or the Elementalist in particular, who can't even weapon swap, that's the difference between having two sigils or just a single one for your entire build. You know, like as I play Engineer, I'm always a little bit put off using my rifle because I only get one sigil there, and it's kind of annoying. However, they are changing that. Two-handed weapons will now have 2 sigil slots. So there's no more discrimination between whether you're wielding a one-handed or a two-handed weapon. It's mostly just for flavor. There is still some discrimination. Again, I saw some people were having discussions about in the way you craft two-handed and one-handed weapons. Like, it costs just as much to craft a two-hander as a one-hander in theory. But for the way that the sigils work, that's all now been normalized. And I think that's a really nice change. So now, on my engineer and on my elementalist, I might not be more inclined now to run staff and run rifle because I get both of my sigils. That's not the best thing, though. That is not the best thing. Another fact about sigils that's always been in the game, and I remember when I first learned that this didn't work, I was very disappointed about it. All sigils share their internal cooldowns. Okay, so you guys might be familiar with the Sigil of Air. This means when you crit someone, you have a chance on that crit to summon a lightning strike that hits them for some mediocre amount of damage, okay? People like to run that sigil. There's also a sigil in the game called the Sigil of Battle, and this means when you swap weapons or you swap achievements or kits or whatever, you get 3 might, okay? These are both sigils that have cooldowns. The air one recharges in like 5 seconds before you can then strike them again, and the battle one has a cooldown of 9 seconds, I believe, or 7 seconds, to stop you basically if you were an engineer constantly swapping in and out of kits and giving yourself 25 might straight away. They both have internal cooldowns, but what you guys might not realize, and there's always been an obscure fact about their system, is that those sigils have the same cooldown. So, if you swap your weapon and give yourself 3 might, if you have both of these sigils equipped, you swap your weapon, give yourself 3 might, you actually can't hit someone with a lightning strike until your battle sigils come off of cooldown. And likewise, if you've just hit someone with a lightning bolt, you're not going to be able to weapon swap to get 3 might until the lightning bolt sigil is off of cooldown. They all share the same cooldown, and because many of them all have an equal cooldown, it means you only ever get 1 sigil at all. For example, if I was running energy, gain a free dodge when you weapon swap, and battle, gain 3 might when you weapon swap, because they have identical cooldowns, I will only ever get the benefit of one of those sigils, because it will just keep proccing energy over and over and over again. I believe the one that's in your main hand is the one that it favors. And it sucks. It reduces significantly the options you have for choosing a sigil. Basically, you're always going to want one sigil that procs, maybe on crit, on hit, when you get hit, when you swap. You want one procking sigil, and then you want to have like one always on sigil, like say you do 5% more damage flat. I meet a lot of people still that don't understand that that's a rule, and they run really stupid and nonsensical sigils that they get no benefit out of. However, why do I tell you guys all of this? Because the other big change that's happening to sigils is that's now eliminated. You now can run battle and energy together, which would mean the next time you weapon swap, you get a free dodge and you get 3 might. Or you could run, say, a Sigil of Air, which does the lightning strike thing I talked about, and you could run a Sigil of Fire, which is exactly the same except it gives you a fire blast. And now you could run both, and you'd have a chance to have some big spike that suddenly comes down when you get a perfect crit, and it will trigger both sigils at once. There are really cool options that are now available. You can't stack the same sigil twice, so I can't run 2 battle, for example, and get 6 might. I could still only get 3 might, but as long as you're running 2 different sigils, you can have them both together. And that opens up a lot of exciting builds instantly. For me, the way I run in PvP, it's actually made the build that I like to play a little bit stronger, and I'm very excited to try it. And it also means I'm going to be a lot more inclined to run alternate sigils and weapon sets in PvE and World vs. World as well. Like, I've got tons of weapons with loads of fancy skins, but I've never been compelled to really use them that much because I have the sigils that I like to use, and I don't experiment that much because I couldn't before, and now I can, so it's very exciting. On top of that, which may already have your mind buzzing with cool ideas, they're actually changing many of the sigils too. There are some really nonsensical sigils in Guild Wars 2, like for example, there's a support sigil which heals you for a minuscule amount and allies around you in a really short range for a minuscule amount, but it only does it as a chance when you crit. And that just makes no sense whatsoever. That's a support sigil. You're probably going to want healing power, defensive gear while you're running that sigil. But short-sightedly, the devs made it only trigger when you crit someone. So now you need precision as well on a supportive build, and it just doesn't make any sense. Sigils like that, all of the weird ones that have an obscure effect or won't proc that often, are probably going to be changed. Many of them have been affected, and they're now going to have new effects like, oh, this is just a 100% chance it will happen the next time you crit someone. Or it's a 30% chance on regular hits, or when you get hit. So they're like curbing the really weird sigils and hopefully making some more interesting stuff come out of them. And so if you combine that with the idea that now you get like to double up on all these critting sigils, there should be some very cool stuff coming. There is one caveat to that change as well that I should mention. You guys know Bloodlust sigils, which means when you kill an enemy, you gain plus 10 power and it will stack 25 times. Well, sigils like that, you still can't stack together, so you can't have, say, for example, Bloodlust and Corruption on at the same time. You can't have plus 250 power for free and plus 250 condition damage for free and then swap them out. They haven't allowed you to do that, which is a bit of a shame. That would have been amazing, because then you could have just slowly cycled through every single type of those sigils and had like a crap ton of toughness and condition damage and precision and healing power. Oh, it would have been amazing, but they've decided not to do that, so do bear that in mind. But otherwise, sigils are looking way more interesting, and I very much agree that this was one of those weird, stupid little hidden rules that didn't seem necessary, seemed like an oversight, wasn't well explained to players, and it's nice that it's now been cut away. So maybe you're watching this video and you've only just learned that this is the case, and maybe you won't be that excited, but trust me, it's going to make your builds better, I promise you. So the next thing as well, we've talked about sigils, we've talked about ferocity. Runes are also changing. They mentioned many times in the live stream that basically every single rune seems to have been touched, seems to have been rebalanced. Again, like in theme, I guess, with a lot of the other updates and changes that are going here, they're being made to be a lot more consistent. There are a lot of weird runes that might proc some effect on you, but at an odd moment. You know, it might proc on you when you're at 10% health left, or when you're at 20% health left, or when you're at 80% health left, and there was never very much consistency there. So they're hoping to bring that into line, as well as buff up many of the basically useless rune sets that exist right now. For example, there's a rune set called Runes of Strength. These are actually kind of popular already, but the idea of the Runes of Strength is currently they give you power, and they also extend your might duration slightly, I believe by 20% at tier 2. And then when you hit the tier 6, it means you do 5% more damage while you're under the effect of might. Now, it sounds cool. It sounds like the kind of rune set you'd go for if you were having a lot of might in your build. But this set was always overshadowed by the fact that you could just take 2 runes of this set, plus 2 runes of another set, plus 2 runes of another set, and stack really high might duration. And by stacking that really high might duration, you could get much higher might, more damage anyway. So you were never incentivized, or very rarely were you incentivized to go the full 6 into this set. The devs basically seem to make it clear that they don't like the idea of people mixing and matching like this. Again, I quite like those little things. I like those little levels of complexity, but they seem to not like this idea. They want you to go the full investment into these lines, and so now they've changed the Runes of Strength to give you a lot of that might duration as well. So now, the way that the runes would work is this. They give you 25 power for the tier 1, then they give you 10% might for the tier 2, as opposed to the old 20%. Then they give you 50 power. Then they give you 15% might duration and the old stat, which was a chance to gain might when you're hit. Then they give you 100 power, and then they give you 20% might duration and 5% extra damage under might, just as they used to. So as you can see, basically what they've done is they've added loads of this might duration in that usually you'd have to go 222 from different runes to find. But this actually allows you to have the perks of going all the way into the Runes of Strength. So that's just one example of what they're doing, but they're trying to make it all a lot more consistent. They'll be buffing a lot of rune sets. I've heard that apparently on the trading post, prices are going absolutely bonkers right now. So if you're trying to invest or something, maybe it's a little bit too late already for you. But yeah, they're bringing a lot more rune sets into viability. I'm really hoping that there's going to be some cool ones. So that's very, very exciting to me. Just the fact that they've touched all runes, and we didn't get many examples, but the fact that they've touched all runes does sound cool. Like, a big thing as well that they went through was like bugs. You guys wouldn't believe how many bugs there are in this game, just weird things that don't work. Apparently they mentioned that the Runes of the Ranger, when you get the final tier of Runes of the Ranger, if you guys aren't aware, this is supposed to give you 5% more damage while you have a companion. And apparently that was just bugged. It didn't do anything. It had no effect whatsoever, supposedly. And this has now been fixed. But moving on, so just before they did the balance preview, they actually talked about one other thing. For those of you guys that aren't interested in PvP, this won't be much news to you. But the way you get stats, like your core stats are made up in PvP, they're not attached to your weapons or your armor. They're actually all associated with a single amulet. You buy this amulet for free, and they come with like specific loaded stats. Okay, so if you want to play a really tanky guy, you might go for a soldier's amulet, which gives you loads of vitality and loads of toughness, for example. If you want to play a really glassy power guy, then you might equip a berserker's amulet, which will give you power, crit damage, precision, and so forth. There are Condi amulets and so on. But there aren't really that many amulets. There's maybe 9, that might even be more than there actually are already. But there's really not that many amulets, especially when you consider all the options you have in PvE and World vs. World, where not only are there a bunch of different sets you can go for, but you can mix and max as well. Like, there's so much more option. There's a lot you can't do in PvP, and I think that restriction is important to a level, because you don't want to, like, introduce all this crazy OP stuff or make the learning curve quite too steep by just drowning people in amulets. But there should be some more, and indeed that's what they're going to be doing too. We're going to have a bunch of new stat combos for PvP. I believe they said like Dire and some of the ones that they consider really OP. Probably Sentinels is on that list that exist in PvE. Probably won't be coming to PvP, but there are going to be a bunch of new options. And again, the kind of controversial thing that they've stated here too, though, is you have to unlock them. And it goes completely against their original philosophies for how PvP should work, that you just have everything, you're on a level playing field with everyone else, and you get to play. You know, what happens if one of these amulets is ridiculously powerful or crucial to a specific spec that is top of the line metagame spec that you sort of have to run for a while? If we get to that state of the game at some point a few months down the line, and yet people can't get that amulet because it's going to take them too long to unlock it, then people are going to be annoyed. And of course, this is what everyone's worried about. This is why there's a bit of controversy. It depends how they price the amulets. I believe that this should be a one-time cost. I understand why they're doing it. And for the record, why they're doing this is because they don't want new players, as I said, to come into the game and then drown in amulets and rune choices and sigil choices. It just wouldn't be very friendly to them. So the idea is they get a base bunch of nice stuff that they can pick from, and then as they continue to play through PvP, they get these unlocked as and when they want them. And not only does it help them learn the game at an easier pace, but it also gives you more incentive to earn glory and participate in the reward system. So it sort of makes sense. The problem is, a lot of PvPers who don't need that time to wait about are being asked to buy these new healing skills with skill points that they don't have. Yes, you can spend glory on it at the moment, but it costs an unnecessary amount of glory to get those skill points at the moment, especially with the other rewards that are currently available. Like, it's like saying, oh, do you want to have 20 gold or a single skill point with the way that glory works at the moment because of the new vendor? People don't want to spend this. They don't want to throw so much money away on those skill points. And the way a lot of PvPers operate is they'll delete and recreate characters all the time. And every time you do that, they're then asking you to spend loads of time before you can get your new heal skill. There's a particular problem, for example, if you're playing a Mesmer right now in PvP. Really annoying. So they've said that they're doing this more with the new amulets. If it's just a one-time account-bound unlock, I'm totally happy with it. If it's account-bound, I think that's really smart. But if it continues to be character-bound, it's going to be a real issue. Nonetheless, I'm looking forward to the new stat sets, and I guess that's pretty much all there is for news on that area. Okay, so lastly, they gave us a little bit of a preview at the balance changes that are coming to the classes. Because of the fact that all of this stuff is happening with crit damage, with sigils and runes, they didn't go crazy with profession updates. And you know what? I'm fine with that. For example, Elementalist, they didn't announce anything that really got me very interested or made me think that Ellies were going to be anywhere near meta ever again in this update. However, I'm still excited to go back in on my Elementalist because of the changes that I know that are happening to the runes and sigils. So even though nothing specifically happens to them, I think globally, because of changes to the game, there is actually going to be more options available. I will go into specifically what they said about Elementalist and then just other interesting things I picked out. And I'm going to go at you from like a PvP mindset here, guys. So do consider what this could mean for other areas of the game. They said basically that Ellies lack sustain, and that's completely true. Ellies used to be quite good with their sustain. That was all like nerfed. One of the key skills that they used to sustain themselves with was Signal of Restoration. This ability was our heal skill, and it passively meant as you used abilities, you gained healing. Well, they nerfed that just for PvP a while ago. They split the skill, so it's less effective in PvP. They're actually restoring that effectiveness with this update because they feel that Ellies are just like so squishy at this point, and they really are. Ellies have the lowest vitality and armor class in the game, and they really don't have the abilities that they need to compensate for that anymore. However, that said, Signal of Restoration gives Ellies basically no utility. You pretty much need Ether Renewal, which is the Condi Cleanse heal skill in the meta at the moment. You pretty much need it. And on the spec I run, I use the Glyph because I need the quality of life from the swiftness to get around, and I need the quality of life from the protection to survive a lot of encounters. The Signet gives you no quality of life at all, and I really can't see that this is going to change the way most Ellies work in a really significant way. So what that I get, you know, I think it turns down to like 40 extra health per skill. So what? what if I get that tiny little bit of extra health if it just means I'm going to instantly melt to every Condi in the game? So I really don't see that as being a big change, but some people are quite excited about it. They also did tiny other little quality of life things. They said that the recharge on Armor of Earth is being dropped down. It was a few seconds of stability and protection and a stun break on a 90-second cooldown, which was really, really, really high cooldown for what it was when you consider other classes in the game and other areas of stability that people have so freely and easily now. They're dropping it down to 75 seconds. You can still trait for it to go even lower, but again, I see it as a tiny bit of quality of life. They mentioned that they're adding 3 seconds of regeneration to Water Trident, which is the Scepter 3 skill in Water Attunement. And they said, oh, this could be something quite interesting because you can trait as an Elementalist to remove conditions when you apply regeneration. And that all sounds well and good, but also with the way that they've changed the Water magic traits lately, if you're going for that, you're gaining regeneration when you're getting critically hit anyway. And because they nerfed that Grandmaster trait so heavily with a hefty internal cooldown on it, 3 seconds of regen on Water Trident is not going to make any difference at all for the Condi Cleanse trait. It's really not. I see that as a very, very minor change. Also, especially if you're taking something like Elemental Attunement, it just doesn't work. It's not going to do anything for us. They did do a couple, again, of quality of life updates for Dagger Elementalists. I think Dagger is probably one of the most viable ways you can play Ellie at the moment. And for reference, for those of you who don't know, there are maybe 5 or 6 decent Ellies that play in North America at the moment for PvP, and these are the changes that are hopefully going to bring us a little bit closer into the meta, but it's not going to work. Burning Speed now, which is Fire Dagger 3, which makes you move in as a rush attack, is now an evade, so it's got a little bit more defensive utility to it. And they're making Water 3 on Dagger become a blast finisher also, which is quite nice. It means that you actually get quite a few blast finishers on the Dagger setup again, and I think it actually brings it in line with the amount of blast finishers you get on Scepter, or maybe just one less. So it's kind of nice. That's what they've done to Ellie, though. I don't see massive changes at all here. I think a lot of people are kind of hyped about World versus World, but really, I'm not seeing huge changes there. Again, this isn't the full list of changes that are happening to the classes. There were a few other minor notable things, like the healing signet is slightly getting nerfed. Pin down is going to have a bit more of an animation and a tail, so you can start to dodge it. They're doing a couple of things to reduce the effectiveness of Minion Master Necromancers. They are changing Healing Breeze on Guardians and also their new heal skill, so that they're perhaps slightly more viable. And they're also nerfing Immobilizes from the Engineers Net turret, but they're all very piecemeal, small changes, the shaving of skills, as they say, rather than big sweeping things. And the full list, I guess, will get published at some point before the patch goes live. That's about it, guys. So that's my summary of everything that happened with the live stream. Hopefully you found it somewhat enlightening. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are you excited? I mean, definitely the things that are stealing the show here are the Rune and Sigil changes. And I might produce some videos on some new builds and things, honestly, once this goes out, because I really do think it's going to open up options in a massive way. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, guys. There'll be a Q&A coming up very soon on the channel, and I hope to see you next time. Have a good one, everyone.